Hey guys, it's Dr. Bickling from Own It Dental. As always, here's my contact information if you need to get a hold of me. And if you guys are enjoying these videos, please do hit that thumbs up button. It's right down below, it's like right down there. It only takes you a second, and it's the productive thing to do. Speaking of production, today we're going to talk about why your doctors aren't producing. I know it's driving you crazy, but before we can fix it, we need to diagnose it. So let's dig into it. All right, so today we're going to talk about why your associates aren't producing. You may have some superstars, but I know you also have some that are just barely paying for themselves, and some of which are actually draining money from your pocket. I went through this a lot. I've been the boss of hundreds of dentists in my career. And in some cases, these doctors, they're making a good living, but it's coming straight out of my wallet and into theirs. And I know that some of you out there feel my pain. So there's certainly something that we'd like to fix, but before we can fix it, we need to find out why it's happening in the first place. All right, so as many of you know, as a business owner, you have both fixed and variable costs associated with running your business. And as you start to bring on associates, a lot of those fixed costs start to increase, particularly stuff related to, let me grab my pointer here, things related to like salary. You're going to have to bring on additional support staff, front desk staff, hygienists, assistants. You might need anywhere from 1 to 3 assistants, depending on whether you're doing assisted hygiene. And of course, the doctor is going to need at least 1 assistant. If you're going to be expanding your hours, the doctor is going to have their portion of the rent that's going to be attributed to their work. You'll have to, probably your insurance will increase. You'll have to do additional marketing, that's for sure. Your office supplies are going to increase, phone, internet, electricity, all these other fixed costs associated with running a business, And so those are going to be attributed to the associate, or at least a portion of them are. But the doctors are also going to have their own variable costs associated with bringing them on board. As a doctor produces, they're going to take home a salary, even if they're only producing or collecting $30,000 a month. And let's say they're making 30%, they're still taking home $9,000 a month. That's over $100,000 a year. They're still making 6 figures, but they're probably losing money for the practice. And even as they're producing, you're still going to have lab costs associated with that, and you're going to have dental supplies associated with that as well. And these are variable costs, which means that as the production goes up, so do these costs. So this is something that you're going to have to put out every month, whether the doctor's profitable or not. So one of the things that I used to do is I used to figure out where is the breaking point with a dentist and associate. At what point, what collections amount do they start to become profitable for the company? So I started to break it down just with the major categories here. I didn't really get down into the nitty gritty, but first we had our patient acquisition. This should be our patient acquisition / retention cost. And what I figured is between my marketing and whatever I pay somebody to keep patients, i.e. make those reactivation phone calls, it costs me about $100 for every hygiene check that doctor sees. And so if a doctor sees 127 hygiene checks in a month, it's going to cost me about $12,000 to keep those patients on the books or to get the new patients in. And of course, whatever they produce, this is their collections for the month, 42,000, almost 43,000. They're going to take home 30% of it, so they're going to take home $12,000 a month in pay. So they're getting a nice paycheck. Still have to pay the assistants, have to pay the front desk, have to pay the hygienist. Also have to pay my variable costs here, my lab costs and supply costs. And then you can see here at the bottom, once I tally all this up, this doctor at $42,000 is actually a net negative on the company. So I started to find that break-even point for a lot of these associates is right around $45,000. So here's the doctor here. You can see they collected about $50,000 a month. And again, I attribute the number of hygiene checks that they saw with my patient acquisition / retention cost of about $100 per patient. They're going to take home a nice paycheck, $15,000 a month. Still have to pay all their assistants and auxiliary staff. There's still going to be lab costs and supply costs. And right here, they're just barely making a little bit of money for the company. So, it's that $45,000 to $50,000 range that I found where a doctor starts to kind of break even, at least in the major categories of expenses here that we're talking about. So These were 5 doctors that I had in one office, and I would do these calculations for all my doctors to see which ones were more profitable than others. And you can see that, most of them were just kind of hovering right around that break-even point. I had this one dentist here that actually was quite profitable. She was consistently producing in the, $65,000, $75,000 range, and she was actually quite profitable for the office. And this doctor right here, you'd look at this and you'd go, well, this doctor's not very profitable, and certainly he wasn't. He was losing a lot of money for the practice. But here's the kicker. He was our second highest producer in the entire office. And you're like, wait, how does that make sense? And the reason why is because he was actually burning through patients. He would work all kinds of hours, and he saw more patients than all the other doctors. He would probably see 250, 260 hygiene checks per month. But you can see he was only collecting about 60,000, right? And again, he's taking home, nice paycheck every month, still got to pay for his auxiliary staff, still got to pay for the lab costs and supply costs. And he was actually a net negative for the company because he's just burning through all these patients. So just because he's a high producer doesn't mean that he's actually making any money for the practice. So one of the things we have to find out is, this doctor obviously was a very high producer, and she was producing very well on a per patient basis and producing very well on the top line. But the top line doesn't always mean everything. We got to find out what these doctors are doing on a per patient basis to really decide, are these doctors really making money for the practice or are they not? Because once we find that out, then we can try to find out why. All right, so this is just an average practice in the United States. I find that most of my clients are somewhere in about the $500 range on a per patient or a per hygiene exam basis. And basically all you do is you just take your production or your collections, I don't care what you want to use, and you just divide it by the number of hygiene patients that you might see in a month. And again, I see that most of my clients are in about that $500 range, and a lot of my doctors are in about in that range as well. But this last doctor I showed you, if you were to take his collections and divide it by the number of patients he saw, he was down in about the $230 range per hygiene exam. So for the number of hygiene exams he saw, he was only collecting about $230. So he was like way down here in this range. And that should be that red flag. He thought he was a big deal because he was our second highest producer, but as far as being productive for the office goes, he was actually a net negative, he was the biggest net negative on the company. So, on a per patient basis, just like that email I sent out last week on what gets measured gets managed. One of the most important KPIs I find is your production per hygiene exam. We want to know how much doctors are producing for every hygiene patient that they see, and that's going to give us a clue because you can't always go by that top line number. So if a doctor's not producing very well on a per patient basis, there's only one of two reasons why. They're either not diagnosing, in other words, they're afraid of doing dentistry, or they're not selling. And when I say selling, I mean communicating properly or building relationships or building trust. So that all goes into selling and getting a patient to say yes to treatment. Now I find that this is the most common reason. I have run into some doctors that were literally afraid to do dentistry and they just weren't diagnosing. So in order to find this out, you need to know what is your average treatment plan cost per patient for your office. So I just kind of came with a fictional scenario here. So to find out if a doctor's not diagnosing, you need to know what is your average treatment plan cost per patient. And so let's say that your office does 200 hygiene exams in a month, and let's say 100 of them need work. And the total treatment plan cost for those 200 patients, you just add up all your treatment plans for a month, and let's say it's $100K, right? And so the average treatment plan cost for this fictional office is about $1,000 per patient, $1,000 per treatment plan. But then you divide that by the 50%. Let's say half of those patients say yes to treatment, right? Of that $1,000. So your doctors will produce about $50,000 a month, and your average of $500 per exam. So if a doctor's falling underneath of that, then that means that they're not diagnosing. But you're going to find that a lot of these doctors are right at your average treatment plan cost, and the not diagnosing thing's usually not the problem. And so if they're not producing on a per patient basis what the rest of your office is, that means that they're not selling. So if they're not selling, it means that either their case acceptance is lower than 50%, and this will cause the average production per hygiene to go down, right? So we got to find out why. So it turns out this doctor, his average treatment plan cost was not $500 or $1,000, it was $3,500. It was like 3 times the amount. And that's why patients weren't saying yes. It wasn't that he wasn't a good doctor, and it wasn't that he didn't communicate well. It's that he was blowing patients out of the water. And he was patting himself on his back because he was doing a lot of big cases, but he was also burning through a lot of patients in order to get those big cases and kicking patients out the door. So although he seemed to be on a top-line revenue level, he seemed to be one of our top-producing doctors. But when you really dig down into it, he was actually a net negative draw on the company. And the reason why was he was just blowing patients out of the water with these huge treatment plans. So that's just one reason why. Another reason why is because maybe patients just aren't, or maybe the doctors just aren't communicating well with patients and building relationships and building trust. And in future videos, I'm going to start going into more communication. I know I have some old videos, but I'm going to start updating them for you. But in any case, let's just review it here. First thing you want to find out is what is your average production per hygiene exam in your office. I find that for most dental offices, it's about $500 per hygiene exam. Your mileage may vary, but you need to find that out. You might be a little bit lower, a little bit higher. Find out what your average production is per hygiene exam. And if your doctor's falling below that, it's only for one of 2 reasons. They're either not diagnosing or they're not selling, they're not communicating. And a third reason, like I told you with this doctor, is they could be over-diagnosing. Maybe their communication is fine, but maybe they're just blowing patients out of the water with these huge treatment plan costs. So again, if your doctors aren't producing, there's only one of 2 reasons, actually 3 reasons. They're either not diagnosing, they're not selling, they're not building trust, they're not communicating, or they're over-diagnosing. And so before we can solve the problem, we need to find out which one of it is. And it's really going to be only one of these 2 or one of these 3. So in any case, I'll get into communication more in future videos, but this was just a quick video to see, if your doctors aren't producing, if they're a net negative on your company, we need to find out why. Are they not diagnosing? Are they not selling, i.e. communicating properly? Or maybe they're over-diagnosing and kicking patients out the door. So again, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm Dr. Bickling. Here's my contact information, and I'll see you on the next one. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like it, go to ownitdental.com or click the link above and check out my services. I have dozens of hours of training videos and have negotiated reduced lab fees for all my clients. So if you want to get out of the dental chair and start owning your business, go to ownitdental.com and check out my services, and I'll see you soon.